The Sleepless Girl and the Truth Beneath Her Bed. It begins, like so many fairy tales, on a stormy night. A girl, drenched and shivering, knocks on the gates of a castle. She claims she's a princess. The queen, skeptical but silent, invites her in. That night, she's given a bed. Not just any bed, but a mountain of mattresses. And beneath them all, a single pea. By morning, the girl is bruised, exhausted, and wide awake. It sounds absurd, almost laughable. A bedtime joke to make children smile. A vegetable, a princess, 20 feather beds. But what if we've misunderstood the story entirely? What if this wasn't a test of comfort, but a trial of identity? What if the girl wasn't a damsel in distress, but the remnant of something much older? A figure born from ritual, myth, and divine selection? And what if the pea wasn't just a random object, but a relic, a symbol, a hidden blade made soft? A question that only the right kind of soul could answer with bruises. You see, fairy tales have always carried double meanings. One for the nursery, and one for the initiated. They wrap ancient rituals in lace and lullabies. They tuck history beneath ribbons and rhyme. But if you peel back the softness, if you listen closely, you'll hear something older echoing through the cracks. The story of the Sleepless Princess is not just a tale of royalty. It's a map, a riddle, a whisper from the past. And once you follow that whisper from a single pea beneath a mattress to the ancient rites of goddesses, saints, and initiates, you'll realize something unsettling. This was never just a children's story. It was a secret test, passed only by those who were never truly human. So before we rewrite what we think we know, and before we lift the first mattress from that delicate tower, let's begin. Not in the nursery, but in the oldest place of all, the beginning. A door opens in the rain. The prince had searched for what felt like forever. Not for beauty, he had seen plenty of that. Not for charm or grace or perfectly rehearsed royal manners. He had crossed borders, visited marble palaces and golden courts, greeted princesses cloaked in silk and expectation. Some were witty, some were kind. Some could name every ancestor back 10 generations. And yet, something always held him back. He couldn't explain it, not even to himself. But deep inside, he knew. Titles could be faked. Bloodlines could be rewritten. A crown could be borrowed. What he needed was a sign. Something subtle, invisible. Something that couldn't be forged or faked. And so, night after night, the royal guest rooms remained empty. The dances ended with polite bows. And the prince, still unmarried, still uncertain, returned to his quiet chamber, more alone than before. Then came the storm. The sky cracked open like it had something to confess. Wind howled down the stone corridors. Rain slammed the windows with the urgency of fists. And just past midnight, there was a sound no one expected. A knock. Not a royal arrival, not a procession, just one knock. Soft, hurried, desperate. The king himself opened the door. And there she stood, not in jewels, not in velvet, but soaked to the bone, her dress clinging like seaweed, her hair tangled, plastered to her pale face. Mud on her hem, water leaking from her shoes. She looked more like a ghost than a guest. "I am a princess," she said. The servants gasped. The prince said nothing. And the queen, clever, silent, watching, did not send her away. She merely nodded and gave orders for a room to be prepared. But that room was no ordinary room. While the others slept, the queen crept to the guest chamber and began to build something. Not a trap exactly, but something older, a trial. She placed a single pea, hard, dry, ancient, on the wooden bed frame. Then she stacked mattresses on top. Not 1, not 5, but 20. And then, for good measure, 20 feather beds more. A tower of softness, a mountain of dreams. The girl was led in, warm clothes laid out, tea brought. No one mentioned the strange height of the bed. And she climbed. And she slept, or tried to. In the morning, she looked as if she hadn't slept at all. "There was something awful beneath me," she whispered, her hands trembling slightly. "I tossed and turned all night. I'm covered in bruises. I don't know what it was, but it hurt." The queen smiled. The prince stared, and just like that, the test was over. No scrolls were checked, no blood was drawn, no royal seals were verified. Only one thing mattered. She had felt the pea, and only a true princess could. So the wedding was arranged. Bells were rung, dresses sewn, and the castle rejoiced. But here's the thing no one tells you. Trials like this don't end at weddings, because sometimes the bruises left by a single pea go far deeper than anyone suspects, and happily ever after. That part of the story depends entirely on who, or what, she really was. A tale with no parents. When Hans Christian Andersen published The Princess and the Pea in the year 1835, he did something unusual for a writer of his time. He openly admitted the story wasn't really his. He insisted he had heard it long before he ever held a pen. Whispered in the corners of his childhood home in Odense, told by elderly women who still believed the old tales carried truths no book should try to tame. But here's the strange part. The part that makes scholars lean back in their chairs and frown. There is no earlier version, not a single printed Danish chapbook, not a dusty German pamphlet, not a French folk tale buried in some aristocrat's diary, nothing. It's as if the story appears out of nowhere, already formed, already peculiar, in Andersen's own hand, a tale that claims ancient roots, but leaves no footprint behind it. So what exactly was Andersen remembering? A real folktale? A dream? A fragment overheard? Or something older still, swallowed by time, resurfacing only through the pen of a man who didn't fully understand what he was passing on? Folklorists have tried to chase the thread backward. Some believe the closest relative comes from Sweden, a tale where a young woman pretends to be a princess, aided by a clever animal who protects her from exposure. In that story, the queen hides beans, peas, even bits of straw beneath the bedding to catch her in a lie. But the animal overhears the plan, warns her, and she fakes the right complaints at the right moment. No divine sensitivity, no mysterious bruises, just deception, timing, and a very smart pet. And yet, the bones of the tale are all there. A hidden object, a disturbed night, a revelation at dawn. The symbolism survives, even if the meaning shifts, which raises an uncomfortable question, one Andersen likely never considered. Maybe the mystery isn't where he got the tale. Maybe the mystery is why this strange test keeps resurfacing across cultures. Because the more you look, the more the piece stops being unique. It starts to look like a pattern, a ritual disguised as a bedtime joke, a repeated motif that shows up in places that should have nothing in common. A test of identity, a test of truth. A test of something only a chosen few can feel. And if the pea is not alone, then perhaps the princess isn't either. Trials beneath the surface. The story is almost too strange to believe, and yet it shows up again and again. In the German folktale known as the 12 Huntsmen, a king is preparing to marry a new bride, but his former love isn't ready to give him up. So, driven by loyalty or longing, or maybe both, she disguises herself and 11 loyal companions as men. They cut their hair, don tunics, and arrive at court claiming to be royal hunters. For a while, the ruse works. They are accepted, unquestioned, almost safe. But not everyone is fooled. The king's advisor, who in this version happens to be a lion, grows suspicious. Something about these men doesn't sit right. So the lion proposes a test. Not a duel, not a question, just a hallway, and a handful of peas. Scatter them on the floor, the lion tells the king. Men will crush them underfoot, but women walk lightly. The peas will roll beneath their feet. They'll slip, and they'll reveal what they truly are. It sounds ridiculous, almost comedic. A prank, not a trial. But beneath the surface, something ancient is stirring. Because in folklore, how you move reveals who you are. How you sleep, how you walk, how you carry your body in the world. These aren't just physical habits. They're clues, signs of something hidden. And in this case, they're used to divide male from female. But in other stories, the same logic separates mortal from divine. The test, of course, fails. A loyal servant overhears the plan and warns the disguised women. They stomp across the peas like soldiers. The trap is avoided, but the symbolism remains. The peas are not just seeds. They are instruments of revelation, tools to unmask the truth without a single word spoken. And that same idea that something impossibly small can reveal something impossibly important shows up elsewhere. Far from Germany, in the sun-soaked courts of ancient Greece, a man from the famously decadent city of Sybaris once declared that he had endured a terrible night. The reason? A single rose petal, folded in half beneath his sheets. In another version of the story, even worse, the softness of the petals had given him blisters. Today, we laugh. We call someone sybaritic when they're too spoiled, too soft, too accustomed to luxury. But the Greeks weren't just mocking. They were drawing a line and daring us to see which side we fall on. Because extreme sensitivity can be ridiculous, but it can also be holy. In ancient texts, those who couldn't bear coarse fabric, loud noise, or rough bedding weren't weak. They were otherworldly, chosen, touched by something divine. So maybe the man who complained about the rose petal wasn't being absurd. Maybe he was, in his own strange way, passing a test. And maybe, just maybe, the line between sacred and silly is thinner than we think. A pea from the beginning of time. When we hear the word pea today, we imagine something soft, sweet, harmless. A gentle green dot on a dinner plate, the kind of thing we push around with a fork when no one's looking. But for most of human history, peas were anything but tender. They were survival. For thousands of years, peas were harvested not for their sweetness, but for their strength. Hard, starchy field peas. They were dried, roasted, stored through long winters when nothing else would grow. They clattered in clay jars, cracked between teeth, sustained entire villages. No feast food, no luxury, just endurance in its most basic form. And they are old, much older than most of our crops. Archaeologists have unearthed charred peas in Neolithic hearths, blackened, brittle, still unmistakable. Some are over 10,000 years old. Among the first domesticated plants we ever grew, among the first seeds we ever trusted with the future. But something about the pea was more than practical. It crossed into myth. In China, ancient legends say that Shen Nong, the divine farmer, half god, half man, was the one who gave peace to humanity. A gift of life, yes, but also a symbol of cosmic balance. Round, sealed, patterned with potential. In Norse mythology, things get stranger. The thunder god Thor, angry, chaotic, unpredictable, hurls peas into sacred wells to punish humanity. Not rocks, not fire, peas. Why? Because they were disruptive. They sank into quiet places and waited. Seeds of disorder, seeds of truth. And in Eastern Europe, peas took on a darker, more superstitious power. If you suspected someone in your village was a witch, there was a test. Silent, subtle, terrifying. You'd scatter dried peas on the floor and wait. Because witches, they said, were cursed with a compulsion. They had to count them, every last one, even against their will, even in secret. Imagine that, a handful of peas, and suddenly someone's soul is laid bare. What was it about them? Their roundness, their silence, the way they vanish underfoot? The fact that one alone means nothing, but together they reveal patterns. Invisibility has power, smallness has power, repetition has power. And so the humble pea kept showing up. In food, in fable, in trials, in traps, in kitchens and cathedrals alike. A vegetable, yes, but also a vessel of memory, of magic, of judgment. And if it sounds far-fetched that something so simple could carry so much meaning, then maybe that's exactly why it works. Because the most dangerous truths are always the ones that hide in plain sight. And the pattern, once you see it, refuses to stop. The sacred sleepless ones. We think of sleep as innocent, restful, necessary. But in the oldest stories ever told, sleep is anything but harmless. Sleep in myth is not rest. It is surrender. It is the moment when your body gives up, your mind slips, your soul lets go. And more than anything, it is a reminder that you are mortal. Because gods do not sleep, spirits do not slumber. Only humans, flawed, finite, fragile, need to close their eyes. Which is why, across the oldest civilizations, sleeplessness becomes a kind of divine resistance. In the ancient epic of Gilgamesh, the hero is desperate to escape death. He journeys across oceans and deserts in search of immortality. But the gods give him a test, deceptively simple. Stay awake for 7 nights. He can't. Exhausted, he dozes, just for a moment. But that moment is enough. He fails. And in that failure, the truth is revealed. He is still human, still bound to time, still destined to die. In the mystery cults of ancient Greece, the stakes were different, but the test was the same. Initiates would gather in darkness, waiting for revelation. But before they were granted visions, they had to endure the night, awake, silent, watching, because only those who could stay conscious through the shadows were ready to face the light. In India, yogis and ascetics trained themselves to meditate for days without rest, pushing beyond hunger, fatigue, even thought. The body, they believed, was a barrier, and to transcend it, you had to outlast it. In Norse mythology, the god Odin seeks wisdom, not by study, but by sacrifice. He hangs himself from the world tree, Yggdrasil, pierced by his own spear. He hangs for 9 nights, sleepless, bleeding, alone. And in that ordeal, the runes, the secrets of reality, reveal themselves to him. Even in Christianity, the same line is drawn. In the Garden of Gethsemane, as the hour of betrayal approaches, Christ turns to his closest disciples and asks them for one thing: stay awake with me. Just that. No speeches, no weapons, just presence. But they can't. They drift off, and when the soldiers arrive, their sleep becomes their shame. He stays awake. They do not. And that simple fact separates the divine from the human. Over and over, the same message appears. Those who endure sleeplessness cross a threshold. They become more than flesh. They gain clarity, insight, transcendence. Sleeplessness becomes a right, not of restlessness, but of revelation. So now, think back to the girl in the fairy tale, the one lying wide-eyed atop 20 mattresses and 20 feather beds. We're told she couldn't sleep, that she felt something pressing into her body, so small and hidden it bruised her without leaving a mark. And we're told this is proof that she is a princess. But what if it's more than that? What if her sleeplessness isn't about royal blood, but spiritual weight? What if, like Gilgamesh, like Odin, like the mystery cult initiates and the desert saints, she passed an ancient test without even knowing it? Because the story doesn't say she chose to stay awake. It says she couldn't sleep, that her body refused to surrender, that something deep within her, instinct, intuition, divinity, kept her alert, aware, painfully awake. And maybe that's the real reason the queen smiled. Not because the girl had royal ancestors, but because she had endured the one trial that no crown can fake. She stayed awake, and in doing so, proved she was something more. Was she really a princess? Or was that just the name they gave her? Because they didn't know what else to call someone like her. Think about the test she passed. It wasn't about etiquette. It wasn't about ancestry. It wasn't even about royalty. No scroll was checked. No family crest examined. There were no documents, no witnesses, no blood to test. Just a pea, a single, dry seed, hidden beneath 20 mattresses and 20 feather beds. And somehow, impossibly, she felt it. She didn't see it. She didn't know it was there. But her body reacted, her skin bruised, her sleep fractured. Most people would have sunk into those layers of softness and never stirred, but not her. Something inside her refused to rest. That kind of perception goes beyond sensitivity. It borders on the paranormal. Because who feels something that small? Who notices the invisible? Empaths, prophets, saints, or perhaps something older still? Maybe that test wasn't meant to identify nobility. Maybe it was meant to identify something sacred. And look at what happens after. She doesn't just win the prince. She is elevated, quite literally, above the rest. They stack the mattresses for her, build her a tower of softness, a false mountain reaching toward the sky. And there she lies, all alone, closer to the ceiling than anyone else in the castle. She rises, like an offering, like an ascension, and when morning comes, her pain is not dismissed. It is revered. Her bruises become her badge, her suffering, her crown. The ache in her back becomes the proof of something no eye could see. And here's where it gets even stranger. She never asks for any of this. She doesn't demand recognition. She doesn't explain herself. She doesn't even know she's being tested. She just suffers, silently, sensitively. And in that suffering, she reveals everything. Because this is not just a story about a girl who gets married. It's about a girl who crosses the boundary between the visible and the hidden. And she's not the only one. Other stories whisper about people like her. Quiet figures who feel what others cannot, who bruise without being touched, who endure strange trials and emerge changed, not just chosen, but transformed. So maybe she wasn't just a princess. Maybe she was something more, and maybe she still is. The fragile ones who came before. Long before fairy tales were printed in books, before princesses wore glass slippers or slept on towers of feathers, there were other women, older, stranger, and far more sacred. In Celtic tradition, they were known as the Sida, the fairy folk, shimmering between worlds, neither mortal nor fully divine. These women weren't warriors. They weren't loud or forceful. Their power came in softness, in stillness, in their aversion to the harshness of the human world. It was said they could faint from the sound of forged iron, that rough cloth burned their skin, that a human touch, even gentle, could cause them to vanish entirely. To live near the Sida, you had to whisper, tread lightly, leave offerings at dusk. They were not fragile in the way we use the word now. They were fragile like fine crystal, delicate, yes, but only because they belonged to a world more refined, more ancient, more attuned than ours. The Romans had their own version. The Vestal Virgins, priestesses of Vesta, goddess of the hearth, lived under strict vows of purity. Chosen in childhood, they kept Rome's eternal flame burning, cloaked in silence and secrecy. If they spoke out of turn, touched the wrong object, or even let the sacred fire go out, it wasn't seen as a minor mistake. It was cosmic imbalance. The fragility of their role wasn't about weakness. It was about weight. One cracked thread in their discipline, and the entire spiritual order could collapse. Later, in medieval Europe, Christian hagiographers described holy women in eerily similar ways. Female saints, especially virgins, were depicted as so spiritually refined that their bodies became hypersensitive to the world. They couldn't eat coarse bread, couldn't lie on rough straw, their skin bruised from wool, their stomachs turned at unclean food. Their senses were overwhelmed by strong smells or loud voices. It wasn't weakness, it was sanctity. The more sensitive they were, to light, to noise, to touch, the closer they were believed to be to heaven. Pain was a form of communion. Fragility was divine evidence. Their bodies were not of this world, and the world itself reacted against them. For centuries, this idea held, that the most sacred beings among us were the ones who flinched at noise, wept from beauty, and collapsed under the weight of ordinary life. And then, slowly, quietly, everything changed, when fragility became feminine. At some point, somewhere between the sacred and the social, something shifted. By the 1700s, that ancient reverence for extreme sensitivity had begun to lose its spiritual weight. It was no longer the mark of a saint or a spirit or a vessel of divine power. Instead, it became something else entirely, a performance, a fashion, a gendered ideal. In the candlelit parlors of Europe, the perfect woman was no longer the one who carried visions or stood at the threshold between worlds. She was the one who collapsed gracefully in the drawing room, who swooned in corsets too tight to breathe, who fluttered her fan not just to cool her face, but to mask her words. Delicacy became doctrine. She must be pale, not from otherworldly purity, but from staying indoors. She must eat little, not from fasting and spiritual discipline, but from vanity and pressure. She must not walk too quickly, speak too loudly, or carry anything heavier than a folded handkerchief. Books warned that strong emotions could damage the female mind, that women were naturally frail and should be protected or controlled. Nervous disposition became a fashionable diagnosis. Fainting couches were sold in every upper-class home, and the word fragile became flattering. This new ideal wasn't about power hidden beneath softness. It was about removing power altogether, training women to be small, quiet, careful, breakable, and the princess, that old figure of myth and mystery, was rewritten. She was no longer a threshold figure, bridging the divine and the mortal. She became a product of this new femininity, passive, pampered, always on the verge of tears. She waited in towers. She fell asleep for centuries. She needed saving. But here's the question Anderson leaves us with. Was he mocking that? Was The Princess and the Pea a satire of aristocratic absurdity? A royal woman so delicate she couldn't even sleep on a hidden vegetable? Or was he, perhaps unknowingly, preserving a much older memory? A memory of women whose sensitivity wasn't weakness, but wisdom, whose bodies trembled not because they were fragile, but because they were attuned to what others couldn't feel. Because in the deepest versions of these stories, sensitivity isn't about manners, it's about perception. It's a test, and only the chosen ones pass. A final question beneath the mattresses. We're told she was a princess, but the story never proves it. No genealogy is offered. No crest, no kingdom, no name. Only a storm, a soaked dress, and a quiet declaration. I am a princess. But what if she wasn't noble by birth at all? What if she didn't come from a palace, but from somewhere stranger, quieter, older? What if her royalty had nothing to do with bloodlines and everything to do with being? With the way her body registered something no one else could feel, with the fact that her nerves, her skin, her soul were woven from a finer thread than the world around her. What if the queen, sharp-eyed, silent, and perhaps far more ancient than she appeared, wasn't looking for a daughter-in-law? What if she was searching for a vessel, a receiver, a survivor, someone with the sensitivity not just to feel, but to endure something hidden, and survive it with bruises as proof? Because the test, when you strip away the bedtime sweetness, is brutal in its simplicity. One hard thing, buried so deep no one should sense it, and yet she did. What if that little green pea wasn't a vegetable at all? Not in the symbolic sense, not in the mythic one. What if it was a signal, a whisper from the unseen, a remnant of something sacred that was never meant to be touched by ordinary flesh? Something that wounds, not because it is sharp, but because it is true. A seed from another world, a spiritual splinter, a trial so old that its meaning has been forgotten, softened, coated in feathers, tucked into a tale we now tell to children. But what if that softness is a disguise? Look again at the bed. 20 mattresses, 20 feather beds. A mountain of comfort so thick, it should hide anything, and yet something ancient, something small, waits at the very bottom. Is it asleep? Is it forgotten? Or is it awake and waiting? Because perhaps that story isn't about luxury at all. Perhaps it's a warning that something sacred still lies buried, still tests us, still divides the ones who feel from the ones who cannot. And maybe, just maybe, the girl didn't become a princess. Maybe she was always something more, something the world forgot how to recognize. Until the night she couldn't sleep, and the bruise beneath her skin told the truth no title ever could.